Welcome to Sleepy Tales, a place where myths and legends are told slowly and softly to help you gently fall asleep. Before we begin, I'd love for you to share where you're from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy relaxing stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a night of our peaceful tales. Now, settle in, relax, and drift off to tonight's bedtime story. Prometheus is the Titan who created humanity, shaping mankind from clay with his own hands. He gave them form, motion, and the spark of life, bringing fragile mortals into a world that had never known them. Yet, creation was only the beginning. Without his protection, his children would have been too weak to survive. This is the story of Prometheus, who gave life to mankind and the price he paid to see them endure. In the age before men breathed or dreamed, when the earth was still raw from the battles of gods and titans, there was one who looked upon the silence of the mortal world and saw the possibility of voices. His name was Prometheus, son of the Titan Iapetus and the Oceanid Clymene, brother to Atlas who bore the heavens, Epimetheus who always understood too late, and Menoetius who was struck down by Zeus's thunderbolt for his violence. Among his kin, Prometheus stood apart. He was not strongest nor most ferocious, but he was clever, gifted with foresight, where others saw only their present hungers. In the wars that shook the cosmos, it was not brawn that gave him value, but cunning, the kind that could alter the course of eternity. The Great Titanomachy, the war between the elder Titans and the young Olympians, left the world scarred. Mountains split, seas boiled, and valleys smouldered under the clash of their powers. Titans, ancient and immense, fought to preserve their dominion, but the Olympians, children of Cronus led by Zeus, wielded thunder, strategy, and a vision of new order. It was in this conflict that Prometheus made his choice. Though born a Titan, he sided with the Olympians. His foresight told him the victory would be theirs, and he knew well that the reign of Cronus could not last. By advising Zeus, guiding him in stratagems, and lending his knowledge of the Titan weaknesses, Prometheus ensured himself a place among the victors. Yet victory didn't make him beloved. Zeus valued his cleverness, but mistrusted it. The king of gods understood that Prometheus's gift of foresight was both asset and danger. What man could bind such a mind with loyalty? Between them stood a strange alliance, respect bound with suspicion, admiration tangled with unease. When the war ended and the Titans were cast into Tartarus, Prometheus lingered on Earth, watching as Zeus and his siblings arranged the cosmos anew. The skies were given to Zeus, the sea to Poseidon, and the underworld to Hades. The earth itself thrummed with potential, but where other gods saw only terrain, Prometheus saw emptiness. There were plants and beasts, mountains and rivers, but no beings to reflect, to remember, to strive toward more than survival. The gods themselves cared little for filling such a void. Their interest was in maintaining their new dominion, in adorning Olympus, in fashioning rituals of power. So Prometheus bent his mind to a daring thought, to craft a creature not born of chaos or sprung from divine quarrels, but shaped with intention. From the clay of the riverbanks, damp and pliant beneath his hands, he began to mould figures. They were not vast like titans or blazing like gods, but small, fragile, almost laughably delicate. Their limbs were narrow, their forms uncertain, yet within this imperfection, Prometheus saw a kind of beauty. Unlike unyielding immortality of the gods, these clay forms bore the promise of change. They could grow, falter, fall, and rise again. They could imagine. Athena, goddess of wisdom, beheld his work with curiosity. Perhaps she recognized in it a reflection of her own craft, for she is said to have breathed the first breath into these clay figures, sparking life within them. Thus, humanity was born, trembling beings who opened their eyes to a world too vast, whose skin shivered in the wind, whose stomachs ached with hunger, whose hearts beat quickly at the cry of predators in the night. To the gods they were insignificant. To Prometheus, they were his children. Yet these children were ill-suited to the harshness of the world. Their hands were bare, without talons. Their mouths tore at raw meat, but sickened without fire. Their shelters collapsed under storm winds. They watched the beast of the field with envy, for the wolf had fangs, the eagle had wings, the serpent its venom. Humanity had only fragility, short-lived flesh exposed to the cruelty of nature. Prometheus walked among them in those early days, watching as they stumbled through existence. He saw them shiver in winter, huddle in caves, or scatter in terror at the shadow of a lion. They quarrelled over scraps, yet they also gathered in groups, finding strength in one another's presence. They were weaker than any beast, yet something within them reached beyond their weakness. Prometheus was fascinated. He admired their imperfection because it was alive with potential. The other gods laughed at such creatures. Zeus in particular looked down upon them with disdain. To him, they were dust in motion, destined to perish like the leaves of autumn. Why should Olympus concern itself with their struggles? Divine order did not require their survival. Yet Prometheus felt differently. In their flaws, he saw not futility, but possibility. He foresaw that, given tools and knowledge, humanity could create, build, even challenge the seeming permanence of the divine. Some whisper that Prometheus created mankind out of rebellion, an act of subtle defiance against Zeus, who saw a cosmos orderly and unquestioning. Others claim compassion moved him, that he could not watch life suffer without extending his hand. Perhaps it was both. For Prometheus was a titan of foresight, and foresight is often accompanied by restlessness, a refusal to leave things as they are. Thus he became not only their maker, but their guardian. He taught them the first arts, how to stand upright, how to count the days by the stars, how to distinguish edible roots from poison. But still, they lacked what was most vital. Without fire, they remained half-formed, creatures of dusk rather than dawn. They could not forge ploughs to till the soil, nor smelt ore into blades, nor warm their shelters against the biting cold. They were alive, but fragile as shadows. Prometheus's heart ached as he watched them. He knew what fire could bring, the power to transform the raw into the useful, to turn survival into flourishing. But fire was forbidden to them, held jealously by the gods as their sacred possession. For Zeus had decreed that mortals must remain dependent, forever beneath the might of Olympus. The Titan lingered on the boundary between obedience and defiance. He had pledged himself to the Olympians in war, yet his loyalty wavered before the suffering of his creations. Each night, he saw them curl into themselves for warmth. Each dawn he saw them hunger. His foresight told him that their fate without aid was extinction, and he could not, would not, permit the world to sink again into silence. Thus the seed of conflict was sown. For the compassion Prometheus felt would one day lead him to steal what was not his to give. In the quiet despair of humanity, he already heard the echo of thunderbolts, the fury of a god who would not tolerate defiance. Yet in that moment, as he watched his fragile creatures cling stubbornly to life, Prometheus resolved that he would not abandon them. His destiny was now bound to theirs, for better or for suffering, and so the world awaited the fire. After Prometheus shaped humanity from clay, he watched as his fragile creation struggled against a world that seemed designed to break them. The first humans had breath and movement, but they were defenseless against the cold, the storms, and the beasts that prowled the forests and plains. They shivered beneath the night sky, huddled in caves or under the meagre shelter of branches, their teeth chattering, their thin skins exposed to wind and rain. Without fire, they could not warm themselves, nor cook the roots and meat they foraged, nor forge stones into weapons to defend against predators. Their strength was limited, their ingenuity stifled, their lives brief and precarious. Prometheus had given them form and life, but even his foresight could not protect them from all danger. The Titan observed them with a mix of pride and anguish, knowing that their bodies were ill-equipped for survival, and that their minds, though sharp and curious, were constrained by ignorance. Unlike the gods, who commanded the elements and bent existence to their will, humanity relied on nothing but its fragile bodies and limited instincts. Wolves hunted them, storms drenched them, and hunger gnawed endlessly. And yet, even in weakness, humans displayed a strange persistence, a stubborn spark that reminded Prometheus of their potential. Zeus, seated high on Olympus, regarded humanity with detached disdain. To him, mortals were dust and fleeting shadows, their struggles trivial and unworthy of divine attention. He had no interest in their suffering, no desire to intervene or grant them favour. Mortals existed largely to be subjects, offerings and reminders of the gods' supremacy. Their fragility amused him, or perhaps bored him, but he never saw them as capable of greatness. In Zeus's eyes, humanity was insignificant, destined to remain beneath Olympus, never to rise beyond its appointed place. Prometheus, however, could not abide such neglect. He had watched them shiver and starve, hunted and beaten by the world's cruel elements, and he felt a growing frustration toward the gods' indifference. Humanity had potential, he knew, if only it could access the power that the gods wielded so effortlessly. Prometheus imagined what they might achieve if given the means to manipulate their environment, to create tools, to forge civilization itself. He imagined them not just surviving, but thriving, shaping the world with their hands and minds. And he realized that only one thing could transform their helplessness into possibility: fire. Fire, however, was forbidden. It belonged to Olympus, sacred and jealously guarded, a symbol of divine authority. To wield it without permission was to defy Zeus himself. Yet Prometheus saw in fire not merely warmth and light, but the essence of knowledge and progress. With fire, humans could cook their food, harden their tools, forge metal, craft pottery, and illuminate their homes. Fire would spark culture, ingenuity, and independence. It was the first step toward freedom. Resolute in his decision, Prometheus devised a daring plan. Under the veil of night, when Olympus slumbered, he approached the hearth of the gods, where flames danced eternally pure and untouchable. His hands, clever and careful, lifted a small spark of fire, hiding it in a hollow stalk of fennel he had stripped clean. With this simple device, he could transport fire to the humans without it extinguishing, without the gods immediately noticing. Every step was calculated, for one misstep could bring the wrath of Zeus crashing down. Prometheus returned to the mortal world and handed the fire to humanity. At first, they stared in awe, frightened by the dancing light and heat. But soon, wonder replaced fear. They learned to cook their food, transforming raw, bitter roots and tough meat into sustenance that nourished rather than exhausted them. They discovered that fire could forge stone into blades and tools, granting them the means to hunt, build, and defend themselves. They could shape their environment, fashion shelters, and craft implements that extended their strength beyond the limits of their bodies. For the first time, survival was not merely endurance, it became mastery. With fire, humans began to innovate. They learned to work in teams, plan ahead, and communicate ideas. Villages took shape, and with them, early culture and tradition. They discovered that light could ward off darkness, that heat could soften metal, and that controlled flames could transform raw resources into objects of utility and beauty. Fire became a teacher as well as a tool, illuminating not only the night but also the mind. In Prometheus's eyes, humanity was stepping into its potential, and he felt a profound satisfaction in witnessing the transformation. But fire carried more than practicality. It was a symbol. It represented knowledge, the power to understand and manipulate the world rather than passively endure it. It embodied progress, the courage to challenge limitations, and defiance, the willingness to act even against those who sought to maintain absolute control. With fire, humans were no longer merely passive creations. They were participants in their own destiny, capable of shaping their future. Zeus, however, was not long in discovering the theft. He perceived it as an affront, a challenge to his authority. The sacred flames of Olympus, taken by a titan for the benefit of mortals, were not merely lost, they were stolen, an act of deliberate defiance. The king of gods seethed, his eyes burning like lightning, his voice a storm waiting to be unleashed. Prometheus had crossed a line that no divine law permitted, and Zeus vowed that neither the Titan nor his human creations would go unpunished. Even as humans celebrated their newfound gift, unaware of the wrath it had provoked, Prometheus knew the storm was coming. He had given them the spark of life beyond mere survival, but he had also drawn the attention of a god capable of immense vengeance. The fire that brought warmth and creativity would also mark the beginning of suffering, for no gift taken from Olympus came without cost. Yet Prometheus did not regret his choice. The sight of humans clustering around their first hearths, faces illuminated with awe, hands trembling with the first attempt to master flame, filled him with a sense of purpose that no fear of retribution could diminish. For the first time, mortals were capable of shaping their world rather than being shaped by it. The Titan who had moulded them from clay watched silently, a mixture of pride and foreboding heavy in his chest. He knew that the fire was more than survival. It was the first step toward civilization, toward the extraordinary potential that lay hidden within fragile human bodies and minds. The theft of fire was both gift and challenge. Humans would thrive, innovate, and endure in ways previously unimaginable. But Prometheus understood that Zeus's anger would not remain distant. The Titan's foresight told him that this act of empowerment would carry consequences as fierce and unrelenting as the flames themselves. Still, he could not turn back. He had given humans fire, knowledge, and the first glimmer of independence. And in doing so, he had set in motion a chain of events that would test his cunning, his endurance, and his loyalty to the beings he had brought into existence. Prometheus had ignited more than a flame in the hearts of humanity. He had ignited a spark of defiance, curiosity, and progress that could not be extinguished. He had dared to challenge the gods for the sake of his creations, and in that daring he sealed the fates of both himself and the humans he had so carefully nurtured. The world had changed irrevocably, and the Titan, ever watchful, knew that the next stage of this story, of punishment, endurance, and the limits of power, was only just beginning. Long after fire had come into human hands, the gods sought to formalize the relationship between mortals and the divine. A great gathering was held at Macon, a city known today as Sicyon, where Zeus convened both gods and mortals to establish the rules of sacrifice. The assembly was meant to define the boundaries between the realms, what humans owed the gods, and what the gods would grant in return. The ritual of sacrifice was to be more than ceremony. It was the foundation of order, a symbolic act demonstrating mortal submission and the gods' authority. Prometheus attended the assembly with the same quiet cunning that had guided him since the shaping of mankind. He knew the importance of the occasion, and, as always, he had not come simply to witness. Mortals were vulnerable, dependent on the favour of gods who often withheld both knowledge and sustenance. Prometheus understood that, even with fire, humanity could flourish only if given guidance in the subtleties of divine protocol. The Titan's mind worked like a loom, weaving strategy and foresight into every action. He had already given humans life and fire. Now he would teach them to navigate the will of the gods, using cleverness as a shield and tool. When the sacrificial ox was brought forward, Prometheus seized the opportunity to instruct mortals in the art of subtle defiance. With deliberate precision, he divided the animal into two portions. One portion, the bones wrapped thickly in glistening fat, appeared rich and desirable. To the untrained eye, or to a god accustomed to surface appearances, this was the prize, the offering fit for the divine. The second portion, however, contained the edible meat, hidden beneath the unappealing stomach and entrails of the ox. To the casual observer, it seemed worthless, unworthy of notice. Yet it was this portion that would sustain humanity, nourishing them far more than the portion chosen by Zeus. The Titan presented the two portions before Zeus, whose pride and arrogance were as vast as the heavens. Zeus, deceived by appearances, chose the fat-wrapped bones for himself and the gods. The smoke rose in curling columns, pleasing to Olympus, while mortals received the hidden nourishment that would allow them to thrive. This clever trick established a principle that would endure for eternity. Humans retained the substance that sustained life, while the gods kept the ritual and the spectacle. The bones and smoke became the symbol of the gods' supremacy, but the hidden meat allowed mortals to persist, to innovate, and to grow beyond mere dependence. Prometheus's trick was more than cleverness. It was a declaration. It marked the permanent separation between mortal and divine. Humans, though shaped from clay by a titan, were distinct from the gods. They would always live in a realm of limitation, yet they could act within it with intelligence and resourcefulness. The gods, powerful and eternal, would command ritual and spectacle, while humans would command sustenance and survival. It was a delicate balance, one designed to teach mortals autonomy while reinforcing the gods' authority. A balance that Prometheus had tilted ever so slightly in favour of humanity. Zeus's reaction was swift and merciless. The king of gods, humiliated and angered by Prometheus's duplicity, recognised that his authority had been mocked. The Titan had deceived him once again, just as he had stolen fire, and Zeus would not permit such challenges to go unpunished. Anger coiled within him like a storm, and he vowed that both Prometheus and mankind would pay for these transgressions. The first act of vengeance was subtle. Mortals would continue to live, but essential resources would become scarce, and hardships would multiply. The second act, more elaborate, would be the creation of Pandora. Pandora, the first woman, was fashioned by Hephaestus at Zeus's command, each god and goddess contributing a trait to her form. She was beautiful, alluring and beguiling, yet she carried within her a subtle curse. Known for her curiosity, she was to be sent among humans as both gift and punishment, a vessel through which misfortune, toil, and suffering would enter the world. Prometheus foresaw the danger, but could not prevent it. Pandora's presence would mark a turning point for humanity. The age of innocence would end, and a harsher reality would take hold, even as the fire and gifts Prometheus had given allowed survival and resilience. Under Zeus's retribution, life for humanity shifted in profound ways. Disease, misfortune, and hardship crept into existence. Mortals would toil for sustenance, labouring in fields and forests that had once been wild, but now demanded constant effort to exploit. Nature, no longer merely a source of food and shelter, became a landscape of challenges to be measured, endured, and overcome. Fire remained their ally, a reminder of Prometheus's foresight and ingenuity, yet it could not erase the difficulties imposed by the gods' displeasure. Humanity's progress would be tempered by struggle, their growth entwined with suffering, a duality that would define mortal existence for all time. The mythic act of the Marconi trick also served as a lesson for mortals. It showed that cleverness, foresight, and strategy could bend circumstances, even in a world governed by beings far more powerful than themselves. Prometheus had ensured that humans could sustain life and navigate challenges, but he had also taught them that wisdom and ingenuity must be exercised carefully, for the gods watch closely, and hubris could invite calamity. Humanity, in this story, learned both empowerment and caution, an inheritance as critical as fire itself. Yet the trick at Marconi did more than teach humans. It cemented an ongoing tension between Prometheus and Zeus. Each act of kindness or empowerment bestowed by the Titan invited scrutiny and wrath from the king of gods. The theft of fire had been a bold defiance, and the ox trick compounded it, demonstrating that humans could be aided through cunning rather than obedience alone. Prometheus, committed to the welfare of his creations, accepted the inevitable consequences, knowing that his foresight had prepared him for Zeus's anger. Still, the cost of empowering mankind would escalate, reaching far beyond the simple ritual of sacrifice. The legacy of Mycone endured in the customs and beliefs of mortals. Sacrificial rituals, with bones and smoke offered to the gods, became a permanent feature of human worship. They were reminders of the separation between divine and mortal, of the limits imposed by Zeus and the ingenuity allowed by Prometheus. Through ritual, humans acknowledged their place in the cosmos, yet through action and craft, they claimed agency and survival. Fire and knowledge, cunning and prudence became their inheritance from the Titan who had first shaped their forms and fought to ensure their endurance. Even as humanity faced new hardships, Prometheus's gifts endured. Mortals would labour, suffer, and innovate, gradually building civilizations, crafting tools, domesticating animals, and shaping the land. Every advancement, every spark of ingenuity, traced its origin back to the Titan who had first looked upon clay and envisioned life. Yet for Prometheus, the satisfaction of his creation's progress was shadowed by the looming wrath of Zeus. The king of gods, insulted by both theft and trickery, was preparing punishments yet more severe. Punishments that would test the Titan's endurance, resilience, and cunning. Thus, humanity entered a new phase of existence. Fire, knowledge, and craft had given them a chance to survive, yet Zeus's interventions ensured that life would never be simple. Struggle, toil, and vigilance became inseparable from their existence. And at the centre of this unfolding drama stood Prometheus, the clever Titan whose defiance had given mortals their first real power, yet whose actions had set him on a collision course with the mightiest god in Olympus. The theft of fire and the clever deception at Mycone had sealed Prometheus's fate. Zeus, the king of gods, seethed with indignation. The Titan had not only disobeyed him, but had aided humanity in ways that challenged the established order of Olympus. Each act of defiance, from shaping fragile mortals to gifting them the sacred flame, from tricking him with the ox to subtly instructing humans in survival, was an affront that demanded retribution. Zeus resolved that no punishment would suffice unless it was personal, eternal, and unmistakably severe. Prometheus, ever perceptive, anticipated the weight of Zeus's anger, but could not retreat. His foresight had guided him to empower humanity, yet even he could not predict the exact form of the vengeance the King of Gods would unleash. One fateful day, as the Titan roamed the highlands and valleys he had come to observe, he was seized by Zeus's enforcers. No mortal chains could contain him, for he was more than human, and ordinary bonds could not restrain a being of his power. Instead, the task of capture fell to Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, who forged chains stronger than adamantine, linking Prometheus with locks that no force could break. The chosen site for Prometheus's punishment was remote, desolate, and unyielding. The Caucasus Mountains, where jagged cliffs met the sky, and the winds howled like the cries of the tormented. There, Hephaestus bound him to a rock with unbreakable iron chains, and Zeus ensured that the Titan's limbs were spread, unable to move, yet leaving his form unbowed. Even in captivity, Prometheus maintained the dignity of his stance. Head lifted, chest expanded, a silent testament to defiance. His gaze, though fixed on the horizon, seemed to pierce the heavens themselves, daring Zeus to exact his wrath. But Zeus's punishment extended beyond confinement. From the skies descended an eagle, monstrous and relentless, sent to torment Prometheus each day. The eagle tore at the Titan's liver, with talons sharp as lightning and beak unyielding, inflicting excruciating pain. Yet Prometheus was immortal, and so each night his liver regenerated, whole and ready for the next day's assault. The cycle was endless. Pain, regrowth, renewed torment. Each sunrise heralded suffering anew. Each sunset brought the temporary restoration of body, only to face another day of agony. The cruelty was not only in the violence, but in its perpetuity, a punishment without hope of relief, an eternal reminder of the cost of defiance. In his suffering, Prometheus endured. Pain for him was both a burden and a testament. The Titan had suffered not for personal gain, but for the sake of knowledge and the empowerment of humanity. His torment was a symbolic act, a warning to those who might defy the divine, yet also a demonstration of the costs borne by those who act for the greater good. Every tear of flesh and every scream that echoed across the Caucasus Mountains symbolized resilience, unyielding defiance, and the willingness to endure agony for the sake of creation. Despite Prometheus's torment, humanity continued to progress. The fire he had stolen spread across the lands, carried by mortals eager to survive and innovate. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and civilizations arose from the ingenuity that the Titan had first inspired. Tools grew more sophisticated, agriculture expanded, and arts flourished. Mortals built temples, forged empires, and discovered knowledge in patterns, stars, and elements, all under the shadow of Prometheus's sacrifice. Each spark of fire that illuminated a home or hearth was a quiet homage to the Titan who had suffered for their survival. The contrast between Prometheus's eternal suffering and the mortal lives he helped cultivate was stark. He endured endless torment, bound immobile, an eternal victim of Zeus's wrath, while humanity, though mortal and fleeting, thrived and multiplied. Children laughed, homes glowed with firelight, and people laboured, loved, and created, all because one Titan had dared to defy the will of a god. The suffering of Prometheus was the shadow beneath the brightness of civilization, the silent cost of progress, and a reminder that knowledge, power, and independence often demand sacrifice. Yet even in his agony, Prometheus remained unbroken. His mind, sharp and unyielding, contemplated the unfolding human story. He witnessed their growth from afar. Hunters sharpening their blades, farmers tending fields, smiths forging metal, and thinkers pondering mysteries. Though unable to intervene directly, the Titan understood that his gifts had set the world in motion. Knowledge, once stolen from Olympus, had taken root in human hands and hearts, and nothing, even the endless tearing of his liver, could reverse that. The punishment also highlighted the nature of divine authority. Zeus, omnipotent and wrathful, sought to demonstrate the consequences of rebellion. Yet the very act of punishing Prometheus also revealed his fear. The king of gods understood that the Titan's foresight and cunning made him dangerous, that humanity's empowerment could never be fully contained. The punishment was thus both a display of control and an acknowledgement of limits. The eagle's talons and the unbreakable chains could bind Prometheus physically, but they could not suppress the legacy he had bestowed upon mankind. Prometheus's torment became a lesson for gods and mortals alike. For the gods, It was a reminder that power and authority could be challenged, and that cleverness and foresight were forces that even Olympus could not fully predict. For humans, it was a silent, unspoken inheritance. The cost of knowledge, the necessity of resilience, and the importance of perseverance. Fire and wisdom had not come without price. They had been won through struggle, cunning, and the unwavering dedication of a being willing to endure suffering on behalf of others. As centuries passed, mortals built monuments, cities, and empires, all sustained by the fire and knowledge Prometheus had given. They experienced love, loss, triumph, and defeat, unaware of the Titan's agony high in the mountains. Every meal cooked over flame, every blade sharpened, every hearth lit at night was a quiet echo of his defiance and endurance. Yet Prometheus remained chained, each day a repetition of torment, each night a fleeting restoration, a cycle without end. And so, the world continued to turn. Humanity grew, multiplied, and advanced, sustained by gifts that had cost their benefactor immeasurable suffering. Prometheus endured, his resolve unbroken, a symbol of resilience in the face of divine punishment. The eagle descended, tore, and left. The liver regrew. The cycle continued. The Titan's pain was eternal, yet so too was his defiance. And through that defiance, he ensured that humanity would never be powerless, never be entirely at the mercy of the gods. Even as the mountains echoed with the cries of agony, Prometheus's eyes remained fixed on the distant horizon. He bore the torment silently, understanding that his suffering was inseparable from the progress of mankind. Civilization would flourish, knowledge would expand, and fire would light the night long after the gods had decreed otherwise. In this eternal contrast, the bound Titan and the thriving mortals, lay the essence of Prometheus's story. Suffering endured for the sake of humanity. Courage maintained in the face of omnipotent wrath. And the enduring power of foresight, defiance, and love for his creations. For centuries, Prometheus remained bound to the desolate cliffs of the Caucasus, enduring the relentless torment of Zeus's wrath. The eagle descended daily, tearing at his liver, a cycle of suffering as unyielding as time itself. Yet even in the depths of agony, the Titan's mind remained sharp, his foresight unclouded. Legends whispered of a prophecy that lingered like a shadow over Olympus. Only a descendant of Zeus himself could end Prometheus's torment. This knowledge lingered in the Titan's mind, a quiet reassurance that his suffering, though seemingly eternal, would one day meet its conclusion. The moment of liberation came unexpectedly, amidst the labours of a mortal hero renowned across the lands. Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules. On his journey to fulfill impossible tasks, he arrived at the remote Caucasus, guided not solely by chance, but by the threads of destiny that intertwined hero, titan, and god. There, high on the cliffs, where wind and snow conspired against all who dared ascend, Heracles approached the bound Prometheus. The Titan, weary beyond measure, recognized the mortal immediately, sensing that the fulfillment of the prophecy had arrived. With precision and strength unmatched by any ordinary human, Heracles slew the eagle, ending the daily cycle of torment that had lasted for countless ages. The bird fell into the void, never to return, and silence descended upon the cliffs for the first time in centuries. Its cries no longer pierced the wind. The sun illuminated Prometheus's chained form without interruption. With careful effort, Heracles shattered the unbreakable iron chains, freeing the Titan from the bonds forged by Hephaestus under Zeus's command. Prometheus stood once more upon the mountain, unshackled and victorious, though his body bore the scars of endless suffering. His release, however, did not erase the complexities of his relationship with Zeus. Though the Titan was now free, reconciliation was inevitable yet incomplete. Zeus, recognizing that his authority had been both challenged and subtly reinforced through Prometheus's enduring defiance, approached with caution. The king of gods understood the precarious balance. Prometheus had aided humanity immeasurably, yet his actions had repeatedly mocked divine supremacy. There was no total forgiveness, no erasure of past defiance. Still, a reluctant acknowledgement passed between them. Prometheus's freedom was granted, but tension remained, a reminder that power and rebellion were entwined in the eternal dance of gods and mortals. As part of this reconciliation, Prometheus took a binding oath, one that limited his capacity to interfere directly in divine affairs, yet did not strip him of his foresight or influence. He carried knowledge of a secret prophecy, one that concerned the future of Zeus's rule, the potential threats to Olympus, and the enduring fate of humanity. Though constrained, the Titan's understanding subtly shaped the choices of the king of gods. Zeus, though mighty, had to account for Prometheus's insight, a recognition that even rebellion could not exist without consequences that shaped the very framework of divine authority. Prometheus reflected upon his life, recognizing the duality of his existence. He was both rebel and benefactor, bound by defiance, yet defined by compassion. Every act of cunning, every theft of fire, every lesson imparted to humanity was a calculated risk, a challenge to authority undertaken for the sake of those he had created. His suffering had been profound, yet the growth, resilience, and progress of humanity validated his choices. He had borne pain willingly, endured humiliation, and withstood the wrath of gods to ensure that mortals could thrive, innovate, and rise beyond their fragile beginnings. Even freed from physical torment, Prometheus's legacy endured far beyond the cliffs of the Caucasus. Fire remained in human hands, a tool of civilization and a symbol of knowledge, creativity, and progress. Mortals had learned to wield it to cook, forge, illuminate, and defend, transforming their world with ingenuity. Tools, arts, agriculture, and early sciences flourished, and the spark that Prometheus had stolen became the foundation upon which societies built homes, established laws, and fostered culture. Every invention, every discovery, every act of defiance or creation in human history carried the echo of the Titan's sacrifice. Prometheus's story became a mirror reflecting the eternal tension between authority and freedom. His defiance demonstrated the limits of absolute power, showing that even the king of gods could not fully control those who wielded intelligence and courage. Humanity, empowered by fire and knowledge, embodied that struggle, capable of creation and destruction, growth and rebellion, innovation and persistence. The Titan's endurance, once tested by endless torment, now lived on in every hearth lit by fire, every tool shaped by human hands, every effort to challenge limits and transcend imposed constraints. The duality of suffering and reward became central to his legacy. Prometheus's torment symbolized the cost of progress, the price of knowledge, and the resilience required to empower others. Humanity's growth, in turn, represented the ultimate success of his efforts, a testament that even the most formidable pain could be transformed into enduring influence. Mortals could flourish, but only because Prometheus had endured far greater trials, standing as both guardian and rebel, both victim and architect. In the grand tapestry of myth, Prometheus emerged as a figure bridging the divine and the human, embodying the consequences of challenging authority while illuminating the potential inherent in creation and foresight. He was a reminder that suffering, when endured for a just cause, could yield transformative outcomes. He was proof that defiance, guided by wisdom and compassion, could leave an indelible mark on the world. Mortals, in every spark of fire and every act of creation, carried a piece of Prometheus's courage and vision, a permanent link to the Titan who had dared to shape their existence. The final chapters of his tale underscored the balance between restraint and influence. Though he was now free, Prometheus remained aware of the delicate relationship with Zeus, mindful of the power dynamics that continued to govern both gods and mortals. His liberation was a triumph, yet it was tempered by the understanding that foresight and prudence were necessary to maintain influence without provoking further wrath. In this balance, the Titan's wisdom found its enduring expression. Freedom tempered by responsibility, rebellion tempered by foresight. Prometheus' story concludes as a testament to the complex interplay of suffering, defiance, and the transformative power of knowledge. He gave life to humans, empowered them with fire, and endured unimaginable torment for their sake. He witnessed the rise of civilizations and the spread of culture, all under the shadow of his past suffering. His name became synonymous with courage, foresight, and the pursuit of progress in the face of authority. Fire, innovation, and the spark of human potential remained inseparable from his legacy, a reminder that knowledge and freedom are born not from ease, but from struggle, endurance, and the willingness to challenge the established order. In the end, Prometheus stands as a symbol of the eternal struggle between authority and freedom, suffering and resilience, the divine and the human. He embodies the risks inherent in defiance and the rewards inherent in compassion and foresight. Mortals continue to benefit from his gifts, building and learning, creating and questioning, all because one Titan dared to shape clay into life, steal fire from the gods, and teach humanity to reach beyond its limitations. Though his suffering once seemed eternal, his impact transcends time, forever linking the progress of humanity to the courage and sacrifice of the firebringer Prometheus.